I am convinced that all people have equal value, but all ideas do not have equal value. Some ideas are true, other ideas are false.
So let's bring up like a major moral issue, which is abortion, between the choice of a woman and the life of a child. Like, how do you determine which one is right based on moral absolutes?
Okay, great example. Abortion. If abortion is simply removing excess skin, I think it's hard to make a case that abortion is wrong. If abortion is murdering a child, I think the majority of us would agree that murdering children is not good. So the first thing you have to do is you have to answer the question, what is abortion? Is it simply removing excess skin? Nothing wrong with that. I peel my calluses, you cut your fingernails and toenails all the time. Nothing wrong with removing excess skin. Or is abortion terminating a human life motivated by inconvenience? Then, if you conclude that abortion is murdering a child, then you've got to ask yourself, is murder wrong? Now, I am convinced to the root of my being that murder is absolutely evil. And therefore, I don't care how many people want to tell me that murder is right, I'm convinced it's absolutely evil. So that's how I think through that. Does that make any sense?
Okay, sure. But I'm still kind of not convinced that there are absolute morals. So, because the idea of God fails when there is no absolute morals. So, how can you convince me that there's absolute morals?
All right. The way that I reach the point of being convinced that there are absolute morals is to try and live out moral relativism.
Okay.
If you believe that morality is relative, live it out.
Okay.
Which means, when someone steals your money,
Right.
don't look at them and say, you should not have stolen my money. Instead say to them, from my perspective, it's wrong that you stole my money, but obviously from your perspective, it was just fine for you to steal my money. I'm not absolutely right, you're not absolutely wrong. It's all relative. Get married. And when your wife looks you in the face and says something very cutting, very mean, don't look at her and say, you know, that was really mean. Instead say, well, from my perspective, that was not a very nice thing to say, but I realize that it's all relative, and therefore, what will be will be.
I'm going to disagree with that because I don't think relativism as a laws of moral is a call to action. More or less, I think it's more of like a sense of awareness where you say people have different moral values. However, that does not necessarily mean I have to stand up like that. I have to defend other people's moral views. If my moral views conflict with other people's moral views, I can still very much say I don't agree with you, and I'm going to act in a way that I don't agree with you. That doesn't mean relativism is wrong. It's just saying I disagree with you.
Sure, I agree. I'm right with you. You're right. A moral relativist can look at someone else and say, I don't agree with you. But what a moral relativist cannot say is, what you say is really absolutely wrong.
Right.
Instead, a moral relativist has to acknowledge whatever my position is regarding murder, child molestation, and rape, the opposite position of whatever it is I hold is equally valid. The opposite is equally valid, because it's all relative.
Right. But that doesn't mean I have to stand up for it. Like, I could still say it's equally valid, but since it disagrees with my own, I'm going to fight for my own values. And that does not necessarily mean my morals are absolute. I'm just fighting for what I believe in.
Yeah, well, why would you fight for a relative moral?
Well, my own morals. I'm not fighting for relative morals. I'm fighting for my own morals.
Yeah, but if you believe that your own morals are relative, why would you want to fight for them?
Because things that I consider immoral are not beneficial to me. They cause me pain and they cause me suffering, so I'm obviously going to try to defend myself for self-preservation.
Yeah, but obviously morality goes beyond just self-preservation. Obviously, if your wife is mean to you, it's not going to destroy you, okay? You're still going to live. All right, so why on earth would you confront your wife with, that is not a good way to have a relationship. To speak to each other in such a demeaning, degrading way is not very good. So why would you try and push that? Isn't that rather arrogant?
Sure.
So, I mean, if you honestly believe that all morality is relative, then someone might make a mistake in murdering somebody, but it's just a mistake. Now, maybe you want to imprison those people who make mistakes, but it's all relative, so it's not something you should be getting too upset about.
Well, I mean, like, if I value human life, and if that's my own morals, and if somebody murders somebody that I value, that's obviously going to affect me and cause me to act in a way.
Why do you value human life? What's the basis of the value of human life?
Because I'm choosing to value them.
Good. So you're choosing to value human life, and I'm choosing to help the communist dream come about. And in order to do that, I've got to slaughter a few million Russians in order to kick out the czars and have the communist dream, which will provide the most amount of good for the most amount of people. So
Right.
That's my trip. I'm not right, you're not right, I'm not wrong, you're not wrong. It's all relative from your worldview.
Right, but I can still fight for what I believe. That doesn't mean I have to stand up for what you're doing just because it's relative.
Well, yeah, you can fight for what you believe, or you can just lie down. It really doesn't matter.
Okay, but I'm still going to choose to fight. So then how, like, if I still choose to fight for what I believe, and, like, thus I overcome whatever you believe, then, like, does what I believe become morally absolute, or does it, like...
No, it doesn't become morally absolute. That's a great point. So you and I disagree morally, and we go to war.
Okay.
And one of us wins, and the other one dies. So now the question is morality defined by power? You've won, I'm dead. So does that mean that right and justice are defined by who wins the war?
Arguably.
If the Nazis would have won World War II, would that make anti-Semitism good and right?
I mean, from their perspective, there was nothing wrong with it. From my perspective, there is something wrong with it. So, I mean, we're still just disagreeing.
Exactly. But the question is there, when we say that anti-Semitism is wrong, is that just a biased perspective? Or are we tying into reality that anti-Semitism really is absolutely wrong?
I think it's a biased perspective.
Exactly. That's what the position of relativist is. You think it's a biased perspective. I don't think you really can live that out. Let's say you have a little child, and let's say that someone abuses that child. I don't think you're going to be willing to say, well, from my perspective, that's wrong, but I'm only relatively correct, so I understand that it might be right what you did when you abused my child. I think you're going to act as if the abuse of my child was absolutely evil and perverted, and I'm going to go after you with everything I can.
I mean, like, I'm still realizing that that person's moral values said that there's nothing wrong with raping a child, but since they contradicted my own moral views, but yes, and since it was my child, I'm going to go with everything I have against it. It's not because I'm saying what I believe is absolute. It's saying what I believe and what you believe conflict each other, and you cause me an inconvenience. So thus, I'm going to go after you.
Right. But I think that the passion with which you go after me for abusing your child contradicts your relativism. I think the passion that you go after me with when I abuse your child communicates that your child really does have worth and value, and when I abused your child, that was absolutely evil. I think if you're going to be a consistent moral relativist, you're going to have to be less committed to your position, because you realize that your position and the position opposite of your position are equally valid.
I mean, but then it would probably be different for me if it was like some random child that I did not know. If I heard a story of a child that was physically abused, then I'd probably be pretty upset about it. But if it was my child, then that changes things.
Right. Which I think is the argument of the Darwinists, right? That the reason you will protect your child is simply because of a biological tie.
Yeah.
And I would insist baloney. I would insist that although the biological tie is definitely real and definitely there is more to my love for my child than simply a biological drive. There is the ability to love. I think the proof of that is the ability to be a deadbeat dad. I don't have to be a loving dad. I can be a deadbeat dad, and I can be abusive if I want to of my children. Or I can choose to be a loving father. So I don't think I have to love my children.
To prove your religion correct, in a sense, wouldn't you have to prove others wrong?
Okay. You can't prove it. All right?
Well,
You can't prove God exists. I could never prove God exists. The question is not proof. The question is, what's most reasonable to believe in light of the evidence? See, we all have a worldview. And if you ever have a professor who says to you, I base my life on proof, boy, you better go after the dude. And you better go ask him, oh, really? Tell me, professor, what are you living for? And secondly, what's the evidence that what you're living for is true? The proof. And you're going to watch him or her stumble all over her words. Everybody has a worldview. Every atheist, every agnostic, every Hindu, Buddhist, Jew, Muslim, Christian. None of us can prove that our worldview is correct. The materialist says, you want to know what the bottom line principle is? Matter, material. Now, it's very logical if you're a materialist to live for money. You don't have to, but it's very logical, right? Because reality, bottom line principle is matter. So live for money and live for expensive toys and gadgets. What's the pantheist say? The pantheist says, nature is God. You're God. So therefore, meditate and get in touch with the deity that you are and the deity in the tree. That's faith. That's a worldview. What does the empiricist say? The empiricist says, I have faith that the bottom line principle, that ultimate reality is what I can see, smell, taste, hear, and touch. Well, you can't prove that, my empiricist friend. That's your worldview. That's your faith. And obviously, the biological Darwinist has profound faith that biology is the bottom line. And that be it your religion, be it your ethics, be it your love or whatever, it all has a biological root. Okay, I'm a follower of Christ. I believe there's a God who created all of this. That is my worldview. And it informs me why I have my rational mind, because it's a gift from a rational creator. It informs me why life exists, because life comes from life, not from non-life. It informs me that the moral absolutes that I am convinced are real, like if someone picks up a gun and shoots you because you're of a different race, that's absolutely evil, because it's a violation of your worth as a person. It's a violation of the value of justice. I am convinced that faith in Christ makes the most sense of life as we experience it. But everybody has faith, and so the question is, what's the evidence that your faith is right, is true? But I'm really obviously frustrated with people who say, oh, you religious people, you have faith. The rest of us, we really use logic, and we really think. Excuse me, you pompous rascal. I can promise you, there are many devout Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Christians who really think. The question is, why do you embrace the worldview you do? Because none of us can prove that our worldview is true. You can't prove it. The question is, does the evidence point to your worldview being true? And obviously, the woman who was speaking before you, did you see how I was trying to push her and ask her, can you really live out your atheism? And I think I almost had her to the point of realizing I can't live it out. Because when I was really hurt by that person, I obviously don't know how she was hurt, but when she was being hurt by that warped person, she wasn't lapsing back into her relativism saying, you know, maybe this is okay. From my perspective, it's wrong, but from his perspective, it's all right. So, you know, it's maybe okay. No. She was holding to, this is really, really wrong. Well, that's not the position of a relativist. The position of a relativist is, nothing's really wrong. It's subjectively wrong, and my opinion is it's wrong, but your opinion is right, and I'm not right and you're not wrong. It's all relative. So you can't live that out.
I'm not convinced that, and there was a guy up here talking earlier about it kind of being possibly a cult, and it seems like there's a possibility that it's all sort of a big conspiracy, and these are just stories that were, you're talking about the eyewitnesses, that people actually saw this happen, but really the Bible was only written by a handful of people who could have made up these stories about the eyewitnesses.
Okay. Possible. But the question is, what does the evidence point to? And when you have a gap of hundreds of years, mythology grows up. For instance, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, when you read his teachings, he never claims to be God. He never even talks about God. And he's talking about how to deal with suffering by cutting your desires off and following the Eightfold Path. But obviously, a couple hundred years after Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, some of his followers have deified him, turned him into a god. He never claimed that. He never taught that. But his followers, with quite a gap between his life and their teachings, deify him. Okay, that's not what you have with Christ. You push that historical record all the way back to into the 1st century, and you never have a non-supernatural Christ. Instead, 50 days after Christ's resurrection, you have Peter standing up on the streets of Jerusalem on Pentecost saying, "You killed the Christ, God raised him from the dead, and we're all eyewitnesses of this." So that's 50 days after the fact. Now you've got Paul writing in 1 Corinthians 15, which is written between 50 and 55 AD, 20 to 25 years after the fact. Jesus Christ died according to the scriptures. He was buried. He was raised from the dead according to the scriptures. He appears to over 500 people who see him risen from the dead. So the evidence is, this is not some fantasy or myth that is made up. These are people who claim to have seen this Christ. And then here's what's the kicker for me. They died for what they claim to have seen. The folks who died in Jonestown died for a belief. They didn't die because they were communicating, "I have seen this truth. You're telling me I'm going to be executed if I maintain it?" No, they died because they were hoodwinked by Jimmy Jones, and they bought into a lie, and they did drink the cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. The 1st century followers of Christ were radically different. They all say, "We saw Jesus risen from the dead. He is Lord. We will not bow and give homage to the Roman emperor." And the Roman soldiers say, "Fine, we kill you. You're martyred." And they repeatedly went to their death, not based on a belief, based on what they claim to have seen, the dead Christ risen from the dead. That gives their claim tremendous credibility. You just study a little bit of psychology and you'll find out people do not die to cover up what they know to be a lie. People will die for a passion, for a belief. Yes, obviously, many people will. But to die to cover up what you know to be a lie? Gosh,
I heard you say that earlier, and that does make sense to me. Okay, I'm going to ask my other question. Okay, I have a science question. I'm a biology major, but religion itself has been around like long before any scientific advancements were really made, and it seems like, and I've been studying anthropology too, and it seems like people would, I mean, and not just Christianity, but all kinds of different religions would make up religion as a way to explain the unexplainable,
Yes.
things they don't understand.
God of the gaps.
Right. And but since science has been making more and more advancements, it seems to me like religion will be unnecessary after a while, just because we'll be able to explain everything almost. I mean, and I've heard you talk about different emotions and love and where does that come from, and morality. But to me, it seems like that comes out of human nature. Just when you look at someone else, you don't want to kill them.
Okay.
So.
All right, I agree with you, ma'am, that a lot of religion has been an attempt by human beings to answer difficult questions. And then as science has grown, God has shrunk. I think that's obviously an historical fact. It's obviously happened. But that does not change the fact that there are basic fundamental human questions that there is no way that science can answer, because they're not scientific questions. They're philosophical questions. We all have faith. Let me give you some examples. Cliff, unless you can scientifically prove it, it's not true. Really? You believe that? Oh yeah, man. I believe that unless you can scientifically prove it, it's not true. Man, that's not science. That's a philosophy, isn't it? And all you got to do to defeat that philosophy is to say, really, would you please scientifically prove to me that unless you can scientifically prove something, it's not true? Obviously, you can't do that, can you? It's impossible. Which shows what an amazing faith position it is to say, unless you can scientifically prove it, it's not true. I mean, that is an incredible faith position. I mean, you can contradict that one just like that.
It's not faith in something that you've never seen or nothing, or something that's not tangible so much as, I mean, you can prove all of the scientific sort of things you can prove in a lab over and over again, and different people can witness it. And
you bet. And man, when it comes to understanding the cosmos and understanding the human body and doing medicine and science, bravo. But please, do not marry a guy who views you as a scientific postulate. Marry a guy who really loves you. And guess what? That love had better be real. And if he's just going to say, well, it's a biological drive, don't marry the dude. Don't trust him. Because guess what? When he finds a biological specimen that turns him on a little more than you do, you know what's going to happen. All right? He's going to be out of there. Instead, this guy you married better understand love, commitment, loyalty, forgiveness, none of which is scientific, man. It's philosophical, it's theological, it has to do with values. And guess what, man? If you were to choose between science and what I just talked about, I think you know which one you choose, which is more important to you. You cannot run a family scientifically. You cannot run a relationship scientifically. A relationship is based on evidence of reliability, and then you trust, you open up, you reveal yourself to another person, and then they might reject you or they might accept you. I mean, there's tremendous trust and faith in every relationship that we have. It's based on evidence. It better not be blind. I mean, I don't know there'd be a ton of guys who would love to marry you, but you better not, because they're not trustworthy. So it's a character of a person that is so crucial.
Right. I believe in all the emotion and the philosophical side of things, but I just think that philosophy is created by humans, and I've never understood why there has to be something greater than us that instills it in us. Why can't it just be human nature?
Okay. Is 2 + 2 = 4? Is that created by humans?
Yes.
I would disagree. I would say no. I would say that mathematics exists separate from us.
Well, but we assigned numbers to things.
Right. But I would argue that mathematics exists separate from my defining or creating.
Yes, but someone did define it.
Okay. Who?
I have no idea. I don't know the history of that.
Okay. Do you think Einstein created E = mc²?
No. It was based on observation.
Exactly. I would argue Einstein discovered that truth. I would argue the mathematician isn't making stuff up. The mathematician is discovering mathematical truth. Okay, now I'm taking obviously a next step that some of us will disagree with, obviously. I'm saying that love is not something I make up. I either get in touch with what real love is, or I never do. I'm arguing that justice is not something I make up. It's a real value. And I either get in touch with that value of justice, or I live an unjust life. And I'm convinced that in the same way that there's got to be an intelligent mind behind the order of mathematics and the order of science, the order of the universe, so I'm convinced there has to be a moral lawgiver if justice and love are real. You see, if there is no God, remember, love is not real in the sense of an intangible value. Love is a biological drive, which is why when I was at Duke last, a student stepped out of the crowd and said, okay, I'm an atheist. I said, all right, fine. What is love? And he said, love is just a biological drive. I said, fine, please explain to me why Mother Teresa works among the dying in Calcutta, India. He said, obviously, drive to preserve the genetic pool.
I look at it completely differently than that, and I do believe in love in an abstract sense, but it's defined differently by everyone. It's not, I don't think there's an ultimate definition of love that's defined by a higher being.
Okay, but if all of realities, matter and energy, evolve to a higher order, how can there be such a thing as real love, as an intangible value?
I don't know that there is.
Okay, then isn't love just a biological drive? A chemical reaction in your brain?
No, it's an emotion and like a caring for someone else out of human nature, though I don't think that it was like instilled in us.
Okay. I would say that love is more than an emotion. I would say that a father, I'm a father, I got 3 boys. I think I could be a deadbeat dad. Or I think I can be a loving father. It's a decision of the will I make to either be irresponsible, be a deadbeat dad, or else to really care for my children and sacrifice. I would define love as a free decision to sacrifice, to give of myself to another, not necessarily motivated by a reward.
Right. So it's a free decision, though, that you're making.
Yes.
Without anyone else telling you that you have to.
Exactly.
So I don't understand how it's then instilled by someone else that's telling you that you have to.
Okay. Remember, if there is no God, what's reality? Matter and energy evolved to a higher order. It's all physical. My experience of love is there's a non-physical, intangible value of love. What's free will? Free will is a statement, there's more to you than just biology, just chemistry, chemicals. There's a part of you, a soul, a personality, whatever you want to call it, that can freely choose to love and be a good mother or be a deadbeat mother. You don't have to do either. I was at Columbia University in New York City, debating a religion professor who was an atheist there at Columbia, and a Jewish rabbi. And so the 3 of us were having this debate, packed out lecture hall. After our debate, the Columbia students were asking questions, and that was a delight. It was really good. Until the last student. This last student, a Columbia student, raises his hand, steps up at the back of the auditorium and says, if I understand Mr. Knechtle correctly, what he said is that if I reject Christ, I'm going to hell. I find that the essence of narrow-minded intolerance, bigotry. Why did we even allow him to speak on this campus? My heart understandably sank. The atheist professor, the moderator turns to the atheist professor and says, what do you say? Atheist professor said, I got nothing to say. The Jewish rabbi said, I agree with that person. And the moderator turned to me and said, okay, now it's your turn. I said, I simply got 2 points to make. My first point is, I have come to Columbia not as a superior moral specimen. I have come to Columbia as a beggar who has found where living bread is in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I've come to tell fellow beggars where they too can find bread. My second and final point is this. Let's consider the option of the worldview that says there is no God, there is no day of judgment, there's no heaven, and there's no hell. Instead, what you see is what you get, and when you die, you check out.